For those who may not know me, my name is Drew Stone. I am the host of the New York Hardcore Chronicles Live. On behalf of Rough Trade, I'd like to thank you all for coming out. Events like this give this community and culture of ours a place to gather actually in person and not in cyberspace. This is important stuff. Please continue to support this important establishment. Thank you. Please welcome a musician turned award-winning author hailing from Birmingham, England. As an author, he's known for his literary works, Isle of Noises, Great British Songwriters, Don't Look Back in Anger, The Rise and Fall of Cool Britannia, Walls Come Tumbling Down, The Music and Politics of Rock Against Racism, and his latest venture, Too Much Too Young, The Two-Tone Record Story. Please welcome, all the way from North London, Mr. Daniel Rachel. Hey, buddy, good to see you again. How are the States treating you? How's your American adventure?
It's been incredible. We've just been on a road tour from Los Angeles over 3.5 weeks, all the way, kind of snaking across the US, and it's my first time. I came to New York in 1998, and that's the only time I've been here. And so snapshot of the US, west to east coast, been fantastic. I feel like Neil Diamond in The Jazz Singer. you know when he gets rid of the band.
Sure. And you told me that one of the highlights was South Dakota.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Imagine that he was in South Dakota talking about this. That's incredible. America will astonish you still.
A little place called Keystone. I remember
awesome.
it because of Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
And the locals took to us. And many hours later, we were able to leave this little drinking joint. I think that's what you call it, isn't it?
Yeah. Watering hole out there. Let's get down to it. Let's bounce the ball back and forth a little bit.
All right.
Let's talk about the book a bit. Too Much, Too Young, the Two-Tone Record Story. Why now? What led up to the book? Why now?
I guess it was it's a lifetime passion of being into the music of two-tone. Are you familiar with two-tone people here? Yeah, so we know kind of, yes, no? Yeah.
Sounds like a yes.
So as a school kid, I was really knocked out by two-tone, and it's been a music that I've loved ever since. And I think there's always been a frustration of not knowing what the full story was behind the label, behind the bands that connected them through the label. And once I made the decision to become an author, as opposed to being a musician, then it was a book I wanted to write, and because nobody else did it, I thought I'll give it a go.
Some of your previous works, it seems like perhaps you sort of danced around it a little bit, touched on it,
yeah.
But it was just time to jump in.
And the big thing really is the story. The story of Two-Tone is the story of Jerry Dammers.
That's right.
And Jerry Dammers is.
Thank you for asking the next question for me. I love when it works like that.
I'm going to try and build on that.
It's great. Just go on a half-hour monologue, will you? But yes, please, Jerry Dammers, let's go.
So Jerry's the protagonist of the book. And he's also the man that formed the Specials. He's the man that had the idea of two-tone. And it took a long time to persuade Jerry that I should be the person that should write this story. And the trouble is that Jerry is a man that neither says the word yes or the word no. And that makes it quite difficult to know where you stand with him. It was a kind of a slow seduction, really. And I did a book before about Rock Against Racism.
That's right.
And Two-Tone plays a big role in that, and Rock Against Racism was very important to Jerry. So a relationship was formed then. And then over a 2-year period, I met Jerry many, many times. We wrote to each other and would phone, text, meet up. And that's really where I think the depth of the book belongs, really, in tapping into Jerry's memories and recall of what all this meant.
And he also gave you some great ephemera that you show in the book too. Some of his personal stuff that turn up in the book.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the brilliant.
Some of the set lists. I mean things like that, right?
I mean, incredible. I mean, I think the visuals of two-tone was something that perhaps grabbed many of us as much as the records, and they work in tandem with one another. I mean, even now, I'm still dressing how I kind of dressed as a kid, and how I tried to go to school.
Oh, you too?
You dress like you too. Bono here. No, so and I think that was a big thing for me in many ways, because the sound of the records and the look of the bands really got me and grabbed me, and it grabbed a whole generation of us, and it swept across the UK like a tsunami. I mean, it really became the big thing after punk, and for a couple of years, I mean, commercially eclipsed punk, but after those two levels of music and fashion, the third level was the lyricism and the kind of the social and political. The social and political that was being addressed by these bands, I realized was an education, but it was an education you didn't receive in school. And they were telling you things that you needed to know about life and society, but a school teacher didn't want you to know.
And let's go to the sort of the origin, which Coventry, right? And in the book, sort of, I guess, known as the British Detroit, which is something as an American I could relate to. So interesting that the movement came out of Coventry, which was basically before that it was a musical desert, right?
Yeah. Yeah, little came out of Coventry.
Yeah.
Chuck Berry recorded My Ding-a-Ling in Coventry.
Did not know that. Wow.
And Jerry, with great glee, told me that he's probably the only person that on 2 live #1 records.
Wow.
Because he was in the audience when Chuck Berry recorded that.
Wow.
And of course, he's on Too Much Too Young, recorded at the same venue.
Wow.
And so, but yeah, I mean, the link with Detroit is great because Coventry was a motor city. Right. And when Coventry needed to resurrect itself at the end of the Second World War, the car industry was a thing that revived it. Then it collapsed with recession in the latter part of the 60s and the early 70s. And what revived Coventry once again was music. And what a great thing for a city to be revived. But Jerry, when he signed bands to Two-Tone, he wanted Two-Tone records to be identified within the first few beats in the same way as Berry Gordy wanted Motown records to be identified within the first few beats when you put on. And so the link between the car city of Detroit and Coventry is a nice link.
Absolutely. And I guess, like Detroit, it was just a melting pot of different ethnicities.
Is that what Detroit's like?
It was back then.
Right. Not now.
I can't. I'm not exactly sure what Detroit's like now, but I do know that in the early days of the car industry, it was a real melting pot.
And that was from immigrants coming into Detroit?
Yeah, of different people from all over this country, different immigrants coming there to work because of the car industry.
Yeah, so in Coventry and in cities across the UK, when Britain needed rebuilding at the end of the Second World War, they reached out to the Commonwealth and to the Empire.
That's right.
And so many people came from the Caribbean islands. And then what's important about that is those people laid down roots. And of course, then they have kids.
Sure.
And those first, second generation kids, the black kids mix with the white kids, and they share their taste in clothes, they share their differing record collections, and when they pick up instruments, it's natural that they're going to try and come up with a hybrid of music that hasn't been heard before. And that's where Two-Tone really is born out of. It's a Caribbean meets British music mixed in with everything that happened in between, which is funk and soul and rock and punk. And that's what British ska is, essentially.
Which early on, in those early days, was really unprecedented. Black kids weren't making music with white kids. They weren't really mixing. And of course, later on, as the story plays out, it becomes somewhat controversial and somewhat problematic when people start showing up to gigs and basically come up against that.
Yeah, I mean, on the streets of 70s Britain and early 80s Britain, there were neo-Nazis and fascists who wanted the black population repatriated.
Right.
Keep Britain white was the slogan. And those neo-Nazis that were marching and fascists were marching were then coming into the gigs. And the black members of the bands would be in an auditorium of 2,000 or 3,000 people. And a good third, according to many of the people I spoke to in this book, a good third of those people were Zeke-heiling the bands, throwing sharpened coins at the black members. And there's one extraordinary story I was told by many band members of the Specials, where they were so fed up with what was going on that they took off their instruments in the middle of a song and jumped down off the stage and charged the fascists out of the concert hall. Imagine that now. Yeah. Imagine the Arctic Monkeys doing that. It's insane, but that's what was, that's where music was at in the late 70s, 80s. It was a riot hall.
Why were white working class skinheads attracted to reggae in the early 70s? Seems like such a dichotomy there.
I don't know if they were necessarily working class. I mean, I don't know if skinheads have ever filled in a form to say, well, which class do you belong to?
Sure.
I mean, because people talk about two-tone as being a working class thing. I'm not so convinced about that, because Jerry Dammers is middle class. Many members of the bands of two-tone are middle class. Some are upper class. It's a class mix, but the class mix is really important. But why right-wing supporters, why fascists, why neo-Nazis were also in love with the music of reggae, of Jamaican music?
Yeah.
That's the biggest single question that still challenges many of these artists today to answer. Pauline Black of the Selector can't answer that question. Rhoda Dakar, the lead singer of the Body Snatchers, ultimately can't answer that question. Why is it that they would dance to the music during the song? When the song finishes, then they want to hit them, hurt them, and then they go back to dancing. It's fascinating to read the input of some of these contributors, trying to understand in real time as you read the book why this is happening. It's a strange one.
It's powerful. Music is the tie that binds us together.
Why does Eric Clapton have a whole career based on his love of blues music and music made by black musicians, and then make a racist outburst over a whole night that causes Rock Against Racism to be formed? Fathom that one out. Yeah,
absolutely. Let's get on to the Two-Tone Records forming, but emboldened by the Buzzcocks Spiral Scratch EP, the Specials recorded Gangsters. And they brought their first record to Rough Trade in London.
Yeah.
Right? Little tie-in. And Rough Trade paid them up front, sold 2,000, then 5,000, then 10,000, then 20,000 of the first single. I guess it was sort of Jerry, it was a DIY, do-it-yourself kind of ethos, and we could put this out ourselves, and then the ball got rolling, and that sort of led into this really unique Chrysalis deal. Tell us about this whole, how Two-Tone formed and what that looked like.
When Jerry Dammers wanted to be a pop star, but he also wanted to operate outside of the mainstream record industry. And he had a vision as a socialist that he could bring other bands with him because there'd be strength in numbers, and that they could retain independence and autonomy from the mainstream. So they would control the music that they made, they would control the artwork, how they toured. So basically, Jerry Dammers said, if you sign the Specials, you sign a concept called Two-Tone, and Mick Jagger wanted to sign the Specials to...
Beggar, what was that? Beggar?
No, to Rolling Stones Records.
Was it Beggar's Banquet? What was the Stones label?
Rolling Stones Records.
Rolling Stones Records, okay.
Then before the hot air balloons and the planes, and Richard Branson wanted to sign the Specials. Yeah. So Chrysalis agreed to this idea that they would sign the Specials and with it the two-tone label and give anything that Jerry wanted because he was so desperate to have the Specials. And of course, having then agreed to it, the man at Chrysalis said to Jerry, so who are all these other bands that we're agreeing to record and put records out?
Yeah.
And Jerry said, I have no idea.
I don't know.
He hadn't found them. But then the kind of the crazy part of this two-tone story is that whilst the Specials were in Coventry, over here in Birmingham was a band called The Beat. Next door were UB40.
Madness.
Way down here in London is Madness. Yeah. And they were all doing the same kind of music, the same kind of influence, all unaware of one another.
Incredible.
And Jerry offers them all a record deal. And the great thing about recording for two-tone is you can record a song, and if that song charts or does well, the band is then free to go off and do whatever they want. So Madness go off on Stiff Records, The Beat form their own through Arista.
Yep.
And Jerry wants that to happen. Just give people a leg up.
Pretty incredible. I've never heard of such a deal.
I don't think there's any.
I don't think I've never. And Chrysalis was doing the promotion for these bands.
Yeah, marketing and distribution.
Yeah.
But all that artwork was provided by the band. So in the Body Snatchers, relatively unknown band, they had two artists who designed their own graphic work and would give that in. Jerry would design adverts and album sleeves, give that to Chrysalis, and Chrysalis were bound to just release whatever two-tone wanted.
And the first bunch of records that they put out were all, as we say here in the States, upper deck home runs. They were
what?
Upper deck home run.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I'll go with that.
Yeah.
Home runs in the top echelons of the charts. I mean, it's a year and a half of successful records. I mean, if you think of the Clash in England, they don't get a top 10 record. They don't go on top of the pops. All these bands have top 10 records and go on top of the pops. And the importance of going on top of the pops is that's upward towards 20 million viewers. It's the only music program of the time. Yeah. And that's a third of the UK population. So the moment you're on top of the pops, you are made.
Yeah. The first 5 releases was Gangsters, the Specials, The Prince, Madness, On My Radio Selector, A Message to You, Rudy,
Specials,
Tears of a Clown, The Beat. I mean, those were all huge records. Let's talk about the Specials album.
Yeah.
Which
one? The
first one, the produced by Elvis Costello.
Yeah.
Wasn't received by critics well. I didn't ask you this when you were on my show, but did you reach out and try to speak to Elvis about his? Yeah.
And the message I got back from Elvis is, I haven't really got much to say about it or to.
I hate that.
Yeah.
I haven't got much to say about this record that I produced. But
what I did find was Elvis Costello did an interview in late 79 on a television program, and he was talking about producing the Specials.
Sure.
And of course, in his own book, he elaborates on going up and down the UK following the Specials throughout 1979, and it was so in love with them that he thought that some hotshot producer was going to come in and ruin. And he said, I'll come in and do it as a non-producer, and just so you can kind of be the band that you should be on vinyl. But of course, as you listen to that record, it's nothing like the sound of a live band. It's a very produced sound. So like on, the track Nightclub, on Elvis Costello got a piece of metal off the road, put it down on the step, and got the drummer to whack it. And he put that sound over the top of the snare drum. So when you now listen to Nightclub, you hear this kind of... It's a brilliant sound. And then you loads of great production ideas on the record.
It's an incredible record, and reading the book, I guess, not everybody was thrilled with the production of it, but of course, as somebody who loves that record, I just love the way that record sounds. So
and then 6 months later, they recorded a second record, which is a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
And the leap in sound between specials and more specials is quite enormous.
Yeah, and like you said, November 8th, 79. There was a two-tone tour.
Yeah.
And the specials were on top of the pops.
Yeah, well, the significance of the two-tone tour,
which was Specials, Selector, Madness.
Yeah, all on one edition, which known as the two-tone takeover.
Yeah,
off Top of the Pops.
That's a great bill.
It is a great bill. But when they went out on tour, the three bands, they were trying to replicate the Motown tours of the mid-'60s when Diana Ross and Stevie Wonder all came and travelled through Britain. So these three bands, who have suddenly all hit the top echelons of the charts, all go in a coach. There's 40 seats on that coach. 39 seats are taken by men. 1 seat is taken by a woman. That's Pauline Black. And you can that opens up a whole story that runs throughout this book, which is the women of two-tone. And historically, they are people that do not feature very heavily when two-tone is talked about. And I thought that was a great shame. And one of the great characters that I had immense joy talking to, as well as, Pauline Black, was a woman called Juliet. And today Juliet manages Billy Bragg. Then she was 21 years old, and she co-ran the two-tone office from London. And on the first day of that tour, the selector asked if she would manage the band. So she's a peroxide blonde, 21, working in a male-dominated music industry. That you can imagine the sexism of that, perhaps the misogyny of that. And apparently she's absolutely amazing. And she's incredibly eloquent in the book, and she has many, many stories and insights into the two-tone story. And that was just one of the great joys speaking to her.
In this tour was really in '79. It was really the biggest thing in the UK at the time. It really was. They were riding the crest.
Yeah, I mean, suddenly, all of the music papers and the magazines are all featuring all of these bands. And what's significant about that is these are bands with black and white members. So suddenly, that's what you're seeing on the front cover of a magazine or on the television. That's pretty much unprecedented in British music. And it sweeps the nation. So you go down Oxford Street, which is right in the middle of London, and what the two-tone musicians say is that all the shop windows were suddenly decked out in black and white.
Sure.
It's an incredible takeover.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like you said, success happened really fast for these bands, and I quote regarding the beat, we didn't have this long period of getting the band together, turning and finding members and writing new songs. Suddenly, it just went bam. It was a silent film being sped up. So the beat, the band like the Beat really just got together. They just got.
Well, you know Rankin Roger.
Yeah.
There's one of the lead singers of the Beat. He starts 1979 as a schoolboy.
Yeah.
At the end of the year, he's got a top 5 single, and he's not even 16 yet. Miranda, who's in the Body Snatchers, she goes out on tour with a hit single, and her mum has to send a letter to the school saying Miranda won't be able to make the exam this year because she's on tour with the Specials. And her dad has to come down to London to sign a document to say she's allowed to go on tour, to go out of England. It's a mad kind of a...
It was a youth movement.
I'm not predicting your questions. I'm right there.
I'm desperately steering you away from... No, but it was a youth movement. Glorious youth movement.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Body Snatchers, who were inspired by the Slits.
Yeah.
Safe to say they were the first all-girl ska group.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't exist before.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, really, because I don't think of two-tone bands as ska bands.
Yeah.
In as much as ska's definitely a Jamaican sound, but the two-tone sound is from mid-60s ska in Jamaica to the point that two-tone launches, all the musical styles that happen between that, primarily punk, but disco and rock, without those influences, you don't get what the two-tone sound is. So if you think of the bass lines in the Selector or in the Specials, there's very kind of disco influences. In Roddy Byers' guitar sound in the Specials, it's channeling Johnny Thunders here and Johnny Be Good there, you know. There's all... Yeah, the main songwriter, the Selector, he's into British blues. Yeah. You know, very eclectic music taste. Do you think of Terry Hall? He's like as far as you can be from a ska singer.
Yeah. Different people bring different things to the party, and that's what makes the whole.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
You know, that's how these things.
Yeah.
The Specials come to the U.S. to play, and it's a tough road, right? I mean, it was a tough. Do you remember the first New York show they played? Was it Haraz?
Haraz they played, and they also played on Long Island.
Does anybody remember Haraz?
That way, Long Island.
I don't know where I am. Yeah. I haven't known where I am for 3 weeks. Give us a break.
Does anyone remember Haraz? Haraz was, right up the street a ways.
Is he pointing the right way?
Yeah, uptown, right up the street.
They played Long Island. Debbie Harry introduced the show. They were meant to play My Father's Place.
Well, My Father's Place is in Roslyn, was in Roslyn, Long Island, yeah.
But there were too many tickets sold, so they moved the venue. And I've heard the bootleg, and Debbie Harry comes out on stage, starts the introduction, and the applause drowns her out.
Wow.
And the Specials come out, they do a magnificent set. They get 5 encores, and it finishes with the audience singing a cappella the song You're Wondering Now. The Specials have left the stage. The Specials have left the building. But it's just listening to the bootleg of that. It's phenomenal. But the trouble is, they were playing sometimes 2 gigs a night. Yeah. They're playing up to 2 hours. That tour takes it out of the Specials big time.
Yeah.
And as a result, you start getting a band becoming quite fractious.
Yeah.
And they go back kind of to England quite beaten. And the first signs of a band that are going to go in different directions, both as people and musically, unfortunately happens because of that first US tour. Then they come back and they play Saturday Night Live, and from everything that I can understand,
they play Saturday Night Live, which is in this building.
No way. Really?
Isn't it?
30 Rock.
Is it
In
right?
what?
It's right upstairs.
That way.
Oh, it's a block up?
No, here.
Oh,
It's still there.
yes. They still shoot Saturday Night Live
Let's
up
all
there.
bust in. I want to see it.
This was, it's on this block, right?
Well, they come back and they play. They're in a malevolent mood.
They're what?
They're in a malevolent mood. They do the show, and then when they finish the second number, they all kind of moodily swing their guitars off and march off in line of the camera, and it's brilliant because when I speak to various people, they compare it to the effect that the Beatles had on the Ed Sullivan Show. When people saw the Specials on Saturday Night Live, I think that's what sparks the East Coast and the West Coast interest in two-tone, leading to people like Gwen Stefani, no doubt. I think it has that much of a catalytic influence.
Musical guests on Saturday Night Live back then
Costello?
Were huge. I mean, I grew up here in New York City, and it was many times we would tune in. It was like your Top of the Pops, right? It was very similar to your Top of the Pops. It was huge to be a musical guest. I remember Elvis Costello. I mean, huge. It was a big deal.
Tell me, Drew. So if there's such an influence that takes about a generation to happen, has such a kind of an impact as a program.
Here in America?
Yeah.
You know, I think that music or record, I think things have a tendency to be compartmentalized.
Right.
So how does the American audience digest that, right? We're confused. There's punk, there's new wave, there's this, there's that. Tom Petty is punk. It's like, huh? It's like, so things are labeled, and it was possibly initially a little confusing as to.
So how were the specials labelled?
I always loved the specials.
Were they labelled as new wave or
I guess
reggae?
I guess just sort of.
Anybody remember?
Anybody can answer that?
It's closer to new wave.
New wave, right?
Closer to new.
I would say that no doubt at the hip. It took a little while, no doubt at the hip.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's like what, a decade later? Yeah.
It's like a big ship. It takes a long time to carry.
Yeah.
Great hat.
How many bands back then?
Take your hat off, Kenny. Huh?
How many big bands back then had black and white members in the United States?
Yeah. Right.
Almost not. I think that's a lot of them.
So Sly and Family Stone
Yeah.
is like it, and we had the equal. Is what,
Scream.
sorry? So I missed what you said.
Sly and the Family Stone.
Definitely a few, but it was
Yeah.
very rare.
Very, very rare.
It's an era when they didn't even show black people on TV
Yeah.
and things like that. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's my point for also the British music press. They didn't want black faces on the front of papers. And I've spoken to editors of papers that were told by upstairs, I do not want black faces on the front cover of our music papers. And that's the kind of the bridge that Two-Tone lowers, because suddenly they go, well, we love the specials and we love the selector, so they get them on the front covers, and that was a massive breakthrough.
Yeah.
World changing.
Sorry?
World changing.
Well, I don't know about world changing, but it has a big effect on the music. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly.
So.
You know, this gentleman here has got a picture of the Beat Girl.
Yeah.
And I've seen this Beat Girl as a tattoo on many tough skinheads' arms over. And this girl is transgender. Did you know that?
Oh yeah, I read. Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw them this one over the
Yeah. So she's based on a 60s artist called Bridget Bond. And Bridget Bond went to meet Prince Buster at Heathrow Airport, and there was a photograph taken. And the Beat, who were frustrated with all these fascists down the front of their gigs, said, let's get a Beat Girl as a logo to dance with the Two-Tone Man, and let's see if that dilutes the maleness at these gigs. So the artist sees this photograph of this girl and bases the Beat Girl on Bridget Bond, and Bridget Bond turns out to be somebody who was born a man, and I love that. That's the transgender stuff.
There you go. We sort of addressed this before. We sort of addressed this a little bit, but reading all the way through the book, you know, what's incredible is a lot of the violence that happened at the shows and how much they had to deal with show after show. And I guess Rick Rogers was their manager. Quote, they were doing something powerful and challenging a racist agenda. Racists are going to try to infiltrate and protest. On top of that, the music and the dress took from right-wing culture. It was reappropriating signs and symbols, and some people got confused. I think that's really a powerful statement, because just trying to figure out why is the National Front coming to shows? Are they coming to recruit, to disrupt? What are they doing? So I guess it's almost they're just coming a little of both, I guess.
And what's incredible is two statements that were made. One by Madness in the latter part of 1980, where they said the only way that we can stop this infiltration of right-wingers at our gigs is for us to stop.
Yeah.
Imagine that, a band now saying we're having to split up, or we're going to threaten to split up. And then 6 months later, Terry Hall makes the same statement about the specials. And then Jerry writes that sentiment into the lyrics of Ghost Town.
Yeah.
Bands won't play no more. Too much fighting on the dance floor. Jerry tells me that's why he writes it. One, he writes it because the specials are fighting amongst themselves in the studio. Second, he writes it because there's too much fighting literally at the concerts. And third, he writes it because the whole country is now rioting. And, you know, it's just unbelievable. One, that they're having to write this kind of lyric, but at the same time also at a point where the Thatcher experiment, which is happening in the UK, simultaneous with your President Reagan, same kind of agenda, has left the disenfranchised totally left behind. I mean, if you've benefited from Thatcher, which is the majority, you've done very well for yourself.
Right.
But if you were one of those that are suffering from the deindustrialization, the shutting down of factories, you're on the streets, no money, and suddenly you have these kind of bands that are writing about your life, reflecting your experience. And I think that's a powerful combination where pop music speaks about what you're doing and gives you a voice through lyricism and through your favorite band, and that's powerful stuff.
Right on. Reaganomics here in America.
It's kind of like
Which
the
you,
hardcore street kids.
there you go. One thing, you know, we didn't speak on the show and about this, which I did a deep dive afterwards, was the Dance Craze film.
Yeah.
We didn't get a chance to speak about that last time. The Dance Craze film, wrought with problems, quote, Jerry says, it represented the exact moment of ska overkill and exhaustion. But in retrospect, I guess when it was re-released in 2023, he now describes it as the definitive two-tone document.
Yeah, he walked out of the premiere because he thought he was lousy.
But having
loves it.
recently seen it, it is a great moment in time.
It's the great archive of two-tone, and many of you are familiar with the Dance Craze film.
Great performances on there. I got
It is.
VHS.
Yeah.
I played that VHS until I broke it. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I bought yours copy because mine was terrible. But it played late night theatre houses here, didn't it? Throughout the 80s.
It did. It was hard to get for years after that, but yeah.
Yeah, and it was. I think when it was made, many of the artists wanted a documentary on what two-tone meant, and they were disappointed when they went to see it because it's just a collection of live performances for 90 minutes, one after the other. So now, as we look back these generations later, it's just fantastic footage, and all the bands go, wow, didn't we look younger, weren't we brilliant and exuberant on stage? It got it. And the one key performance in context of why I've been here is that the Beat were filmed in the States in Emerald City. So you actually, and they're filmed across 1980, but you see a US audience and how they're reacting to two-tone. So at the front of the Beat gig, I always think of that guy who's doing that, you know, with a Beat t-shirt on.
And there's a deep dive into that film in the book, and the interesting character who directed it, or initially who was
Joe Masso.
What a character!
Yeah, CIA connection.
I was like,
drug runs to Cuba.
Yeah, I was like Jimi Hendrix's manager. That guy. He was just like CIA guy. This guy. I want to make a film. I want to make a movie about this. And he does.
He got sacked off. The Song Remains the Same. The Zeppelin film. He worked on Wonderwall by George Harrison and
real character.
And then you know Joseph Losey, the famous film director. His son Gavrik, he's brought in because it's all going wrong. This character, the original director, Madness don't like him, the specials don't like him.
They hate this guy.
Yeah, they really, and so he gets sacked and...
Q&A.
Yes.
Yeah, and during.
Yes. Yeah. So
it's a great film.
It is.
And it's a great, it's a really enjoyable chapter to write.
It was really a great chapter. I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you.
It was a deep, because as a filmmaker, and
of course, yes.
as a filmmaker, knowing the horrors of making a film. I can attest to that.
Well, do you know, I just listened to this morning to a podcast, and it was of Ringo Starr talking in 1973 when he directed a film with Mark Bolan. And he said, of course, most people think that a film is made in the time it takes to watch it. 90 minutes. 90 minutes.
Well, especially, I have to
Born
say...
to Boogie.
What's that?
Born to Boogie.
Don't know it.
It's like a growing 6-month plus period.
I have to say that just back then, of course, making a film, things were shot on film, so you had to get a can of film, you had to shoot a can of film, you had to bring it to the lab that was right up the street and develop it. Then you had to do a film to tape transfer. So it's not like this, hey, the iPhone has the lens. Back then, making these things, it was like a huge military operation. That said, when did things start to change for Two Tone? When was sort of like the honeymoon over a little bit as far as the releases go? When did things sort of turn a corner?
I think of all the comments that I've been receiving since this came out here in April and came out in October in the UK, kind of almost a year of reaction to the book, of people new to Two Tone or people who were very familiar with Two Tone. And the overriding action is the absolute shock that within Two Tone, there was so much, antagonism amongst the people that are responsible for the music. And that all those battles start very, very early. And it's almost surprising that the music ever got made because of the battles that were happening in the studio, on the road. And I think Pauline Black really gets a grip on it the most, in that she says that she embraces all the violence within the selector themselves. They will fight with fists. And she puts it this way. She says, Two Tone wasn't a Coca-Cola advert. We were reflecting society because society was tough. And we wanted to do that. It was hard for us. But all the antagonism and the hurt and the difficulties, we injected into the music. And that's why the music is so compelling, because you dance to it, but you feel the toughness to it. So I think it's almost, you feel that the collapse within is almost written into it from the beginning. And it's surprising that Madness go on to be the most successful singles band of the 1980s in the UK, that the beat managed to last for 3 albums and go into the early 80s.
Just my take, and just being somewhat akin to the dynamics of being in a band and what goes on there, it seems to me that the having Jerry Danvers as sort of the main man, writing everything, dictating everything, kind of grew heavy on, especially...
Yeah, but maybe, I mean, Jerry thinks that a lot of that idea of him being a dictator is a retrospective judgment on how he behaved. Many of the things that he gets accused of, Jerry says nobody was saying that at the time.
Right.
That he's more like a benevolent dictator. His nickname was the General, but he says he did not accept that. He didn't like that title. But people, when you've got somebody who's great at arranging music, who's got a vision, and you're 19 or 17 or 21, you follow that guy, don't you, or follow that girl, because you're on a good thing. And then suddenly, when the drugs come in, when the alcohol gets more, when the check comes in for the songwriting.
The songwriting credits.
Then suddenly you go,
The publishing.
you may have written all the songs, but how come you're getting the money?
Yeah,
and that kind of thing comes in the latter part of Two Tone. That helps to destroy things for sure.
Absolutely, and if you've ever been in a band and you're dealing with publishing, it can be very challenging because just for those who may not be in a band, hey, I wrote the song. Why am I going to cut you guys in on it?
Yeah.
It's my song. I wrote it. Some bands, The Clash, Van Halen, sit down and go, no matter who writes what, it's a four-way split. Some bands sit down beforehand and say, this is the way it's going to be. Some songwriters are like, well, hell no, I wrote it. It's my song.
The Who famously, three songs each.
Yeah.
Queen mid-70s, 3 songs each. We share the album.
That's right.
In the specials, whoever is the songwriter gets the credit.
Yeah.
In the selector, whoever writes a song gets the credit. In Madness, it's genius.
Yeah.
It's one of the best examples of a songwriting split in that if you write the song, which is usually two
I know
people,
this is great. This is great.
you get 50% of the earnings. The other members of the band, all 7 of them, get the other 50%. So even if you don't do a single thing, you get half the songwriting.
That's the fairest split I've ever heard of.
I think so too.
What about that Doors?
Yeah.
All for one thing.
The what?
The Doors all for one.
Didn't the Doors have like a whole agreement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they got that from the Three Musketeers, didn't they?
Some bands sit down and go, we're all in from the beginning.
Noel Gallagher doesn't.
What's that?
Noel Gallagher doesn't.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Yeah, Liam, you get nothing.
Well, no.
Then do remember, then they just get like $10 million or something from the.
Noel Gallagher's a great
That's
songwriter.
similar to the kind of advance I got for the book, actually.
By the way, the
You want a drink? I'll buy one for all of you.
last Oasis show was right across the street.
right,
last
Johnny?
time they played here. That said, I quote, and while from Terry Hall, while we're sort of in this area here, Terry says, Jerry was never great at delegating responsibility. That's always been his problem about trusting, especially the members of your band, to do jobs and share the responsibility. He couldn't do that, Terry Hall. Now, that could be in retrospect many years later.
No, that isn't.
That isn't?
I think Jerry wanted. I mean, I always think that if somebody is creatively brilliant, they have a vision.
Yeah.
And say, for example, you're an artist and you're drawing and doing stuff. You're probably making every 10 seconds 100 decisions.
Right.
And you do it on your own. And you just do it. As soon as you're in a collaboration and it's a band, those things that you could just do, you suddenly have to go, is that all right? Do you mind if you do this? Could you do this? And you're having to, I think that's hard. So I understand what Terry Hall's saying.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he'll say that Jerry is a musical genius, I think Terry Hall says. And it's that difficulty that I think Jerry had the difficulty in having to explain what he wanted, or he said, I've got, so he's recording Ghost Town. He knows how that record should sound. What he gets in response for one of the greatest songs of the 1980s, decade defining, is the guitar player kicking in the wall because he can't stand the direction the band's been taken in. He gets the other guitar player running in, screaming, going, you are mad, it's all out of tune. He's got a band that one member, when he walks in the studio, sees various band members and walks out. And they're telling him that he's ruining the reputation of the Specials. That's what Jerry's up against. And yet, he somehow pulls the band through and makes Ghost Town,
Arguably the greatest track they ever did.
I think so.
Yeah, it's and incredibly, even after that, he had the ability to pull a rabbit out of the hat, so to speak, with Free Nelson Mandela. It was just a track, from a record that seemed to be kind of going south.
If you want an example of can popular music influence and change the course of the world, I would say you would go to Nelson Mandela with the chorus Free Nelson Mandela. And the greatest, the greatest single moment that encapsulates that idea is when because of that song, there is a concert at Wembley Stadium in 1988 and then 1990. The first one, 600 million people globally watched the concert. At the second one, where Stevie Wonder came and performed, where Annie Lennox came, where Whitney Houston came, the glitterati of glossy pop came to Wembley. They sing the finale, Free Nelson Mandela. Jerry Dammers walks into the audience to savour the atmosphere. And out from stage right walks Nelson Mandela, a free man after 27 years in captivity. Here's the man. And Jerry talks about that the applause was for 3 minutes. It was 5 minutes. It was 8 minutes. It was 12 minutes. It was 15 minutes. He said it was the greatest moment of his life. But the best bit is at the end of the concert, backstage, Mr. Dammers, would you like to go and meet Mr. Mandela? He gets this invitation to go and meet him. And then Jerry stands in front of Nelson Mandela. Mr. Mandela, this is the man that wrote the song, Free Nelson Mandela. Mandela looks at Jerry in the eye and says, very good.
Incredible. Winding it down, the two-tone catalog. The last couple of releases, the Friday Club window shopping, JB's All Stars. How did it end, and why did it end for Two Tone on that initial run?
So the Body Snatchers have gone off, have split. So that's one band down. The Selectors split. 2 bands down. Madness depart that way. The Beat depart that way. 3 members of the Specials leave, form Funboy 3.
Let me just say also, you ask about Funboy 3 is a band that didn't really translate here in America.
And yet David Byrne produces a second album.
And yet they were, and reading the book, just seeing, and then doing my homework, they were huge in the UK.
Yeah, they were.
They just didn't really, aside from the Go-Go's, Our Lips Are Sealed, which he co-wrote with the gal from the Go-Go's.
Jane Wiedlin.
Yeah. They didn't, but I was really sort of surprised to see how huge Funboy 3 was in the UK.
Yeah,
they were
great. If you want to listen, I mean,
Things don't transfer over here.
yeah, exactly. Second album, Waiting, great record by Funboy 3.
Here don't transfer over there.
That's right.
True, but so then Jerry, music has moved forward as it always does.
Yeah.
You know, scenes move forward, and then suddenly there's a kind of a move towards a more kind of a jazz sounding, which will end up in the release of the film Absolute Beginners, which kind of almost typifies where British music goes in one tract in the mid-'80s. So Jerry tries to sign a couple of bands in that kind of Talking Heads-ish, British funk kind of way. It doesn't quite work. Each successive special, Reform Specials record flops more and more and more. Nothing's working. The debt's mounting. The third Specials album hasn't been released. It apparently gets to 500,000 in debt.
And it took 2 years to record, right? The last
At minimum, I think, yeah. And then so the end scene, really, from a movie point of view, is Jerry Dammers flicking the light on this empty room where once was partying two-tone musicians. They've all left and gone home. There's a mounting debt, and it's all Jerry's, and he flicks off the light, and it's kind of a sad tragedy. I describe it in the introduction as a tragedy. Jerry Dammers didn't like me saying that. But it is really, because there was so much optimism and hope, which is why I fudged the ending really and give you the Hollywood ending where it's Nelson Mandela, whereas really that's just a little bit before.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
You
I mean, I'm a fan of Ken Loach and Mike Lee. I want misery at the end, but I kind of went for a bit of happiness.
You did, and but it made sense.
Too many fascists, so we need a bit of joy here.
We're going to take some questions in a bit. Just hold on. We'll do a couple more minutes, and then we'll do some questions, and then Daniel will sign some books. But what was Two Tone's legacy? It lasted a little more than 18 months, from late 1979 to the summer of '81. It was a 2-year blip between the end of punk to New Romantics. Before Two Tone, there was black music and there was white music. And for the first time, black and white youth found a common language in this unique hybrid of ska, fired up with the reality of growing up in 70s Britain. Okay, I confused myself. What is Two Tone's legacy?
Is that Juliet? Quote from Juliet?
Yeah. I think
It's in the conclusion, yeah.
Yeah, it's
I mean, I asked about. To write the book, I met maybe nearly 100 people, most members of most of the bands, and then the circling people around Two Tone. And the final ending of the book is asking each of the people, how would you surmise it in your own words? And I bring all that together. I think, probably if you went round this shop now, we'd find 40th anniversary editions of Specials albums, of the Selector album, of Dance Craze. Most of those, Madness have just done a tour of the West Coast.
They were just here not too long.
They were just here as well, were they?
Yeah.
The beat.
They played Hammerstein. Yeah.
Right, the English beat, as you call it.
Yep.
Dave Wakelin's still gigging. There's a demand for these bands to play. Last summer, I saw the Selector open for Blur at Wembley Stadium, 80,000 people. That's the legacy. So therefore, I'm saying ultimately, the legacy is that the music was fantastic and people still want to listen to it. What could be greater than that? And at the time when I left the UK, there were more than 40 cities rioting once again, where the neo-Nazis were marching on the streets, and people were talking about, oh Christ, we need to go back to what the Specials and what these bands were doing. We need to revive Rock Against Racism. And sadly, this was the era that reflected social and political strife, and we're kind of seeing it again. So we can always go back we use history and we use music to reflect our times. And in a way, if this is the soundtrack again, then that's part of the legacy,
Art and somewhat music is cyclical in nature. And the wave goes in and the wave goes out. That's the good news.
You're sounding like Brian Wilson.
It's the good news and the bad news. What are your personal favorites from the catalog? Personally, like from their catalog, what still resonates with you all these years later? What do you still love out of the Two Tone catalog?
Wow, from when I was a kid.
What do you still love?
Well, I'll pick one obscure one. The Boiler.
Oh boy.
Because I think The Boiler is one of the most important records in the history of rock and roll. Because, if you don't know it, it's a spoken word piece, originally played by the Body Snatchers, which were 7 women, written by the lead singer. It was the first song she ever wrote, the first song the Body Snatchers ever rehearsed. And the last minute of the song makes it a record that you will struggle ever to listen to twice, because the girl in the record screams the last minute because she's being raped, and it's a song about male violence. That song was the follow-up to Ghost Town, the most successful band on the Two Tone label. The fact that Jerry was prepared to release that as the next record, and the fact that it charted.
And it charted high.
Yeah, relatively. And the first time I ever met Rhoda Dakar, who performed that, I just heard of a bootleg version of it where she toured with the Specials in North America in 1981. And they used to perform the song on every single day, opening for the Police. I just heard a bootleg. I met Rhoda about 25 years ago. And I said, I think that's one of the most bravest things I've ever heard a singer do in my life. So there's my song.
We're going to take, but I just want to say, I mentioned this last time, but Rico Rodriguez, to me, he was the secret weapon. He's the guy that brought it to the next level.
Yeah, Jamaican trombone player.
Oh.
Played on the original Jamaican record.
Oh, man.
Many of them. And then he wanted to be in the specials.
And then he was in the specials,
Yeah.
and to me, when he joins the party, it goes to the next. It really great stuff. Questions from anybody?
I want to know, what's your opinion of the ska revival? What the two-tone influence?
Good one, Kenny.
I have to confess, I know very little about it, and it wasn't something I got into. And thankfully, two-tone ended in 1986, and so does my last chapter.
Anybody else? Dolly, please.
So I would like to take you to task with the fact that everything was unprecedented, because I grew up in England in the 60s, and first there was a lot of fighting going on. People fight for fun in England. There was fighting at every show. And then there were black and white bands. There was the Equals, there was the Foundations. The biggest band in England was Gino Washington.
Yeah.
And there was Blue Beat, there was modern Blue Beat, were sort of interchangeable, and they had fights between, the rockers and everything. So that's my first point. The second point is, during the time of two-tone, my feeling was that it was forcing kids in the playground to the right, because two-tone was middle class. And if you were a hard kid, you wouldn't identify. If you think of the young ones, like Rick versus Viv, do you know what I mean? You'd want to be with the hard nuts. And so it was politicizing something that wasn't really politicized before. So I had mixed feelings about it. And then I have a question, which is, did you ever hear of a fanzine called Dead Yampy?
Yes.
With Jerry Dammer's Trip in it?
Yeah. Fanzine...
I printed that, I might say.
Good lad. Fanzines were really important to the research, because many of the musicians would speak to a fanzine like Dead Yampy and perhaps talk in a way that they wouldn't talk to the music press. And so there's a couple of incredible revelations that I discovered from band members' confessions to fanzines, that there was no way that they would have spoken about that thing in the present day. So that was a great source. And that idea of reaching out. I mean, as a school kid, when I was getting into two-tone, I would walk out of my school gates and be offered the magazine The National Front. That they were recruiting out to my school ground. When I used to go and see football, soccer, the National Front would be on the terraces. One lot here, one lot there, one lot there. The first lot would start up with racist abuse in the hope that the football fans around them would join in. If they didn't join in, the second lot of the National Front would start up. And so the recruiting to try and get young, impressionable kids, me, 10, 11, 12, but 17, 18, 19-year-olds, was in every sphere of life. Thankfully, that subliminal influence of two-tone for kids like me and my generation, literally by the act of putting up a poster of two-tone bands, suddenly on my wall I've got women and black people. That was normalized for me, and I think a whole generation of us were taught, as I said right at the beginning, we were being educated by two-tone. Two-tone in school did not teach me about male violence and rape. Two-tone did. School did not teach me about Nelson Mandela and apartheid. Two-tone did. Two-tone didn't even, so many factors. Two-tone and music was teaching me where the school national curriculum didn't.
Incredible. Music is like that. Community and culture, right? I mean, Anybody else? Please. My man.
Yeah, in 2018-19, when the Specials got back together, they were touring actively. I just wondered why Jerry Dammers wasn't a part of that tour.
Good question.
So just before that reunion tour of 2009, Jerry met with the members of the Specials, and I think he went to 2 rehearsals, all 7. And as I understand, Jerry, he's spoken a lot to me about this, because it's hard for him that happened, because as we were learning, two-tone and the Specials was Jerry. And I think Jerry wanted to do a version of the Specials that had a modernity to it that was. He was a mod. He was a mini mod as a kid, so he wanted that modernity in the Reformed. And I think a large part of the reunion was, let's just keep it 1979. Other members of the band will say that when they went into the rehearsal room, as you might know from a school reunion, you fall back into how you were when you were a school kid. And they fell back into that way of behavior in the rehearsal room.
You could see it live too on stage. You would see, you know, Terry and I forget the guy's name.
Horace, Roddy, Brad,
The guy was going blind.
Linval.
Linville, they would,
Yeah.
you know, they would just kind of like mess with each other on stage a lot, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Linville's, you know, not Linville. What did you just say?
Neville.
Neville would just, he would go on a tangent talking about whatever, you know.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really sad, you know, and I think it's really tough that Jerry's had to see the name of the specials, and he gave his whole life to make that thing, and it became something very different in the Reformation. But then I went to loads of their gigs, and you can't deny the thousands and thousands of people that filled the auditoriums, and just... It was a place of joy in every single concert I ever went. You know, that's
So true. Every time I've seen him live, the whole place is just so alive and just so happy. It's just a fantastic experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw them in New York here. They were great. They were fun. It was, you know, it was a real fun show.
Yeah.
You know, and it was, but I think part of it was because it was all about kind of the first record and all that. And
in later years, they went on to embrace the second record and different songs, and then they've now recorded new material.
Sure.
They did, but you know, but one by one, everybody left, and there were more Fun Boy 3 members in the specials by the end.
And then I guess they're absolutely done now without Terry Hall.
Well,
There can be no
a band's
specials.
about the lead singer ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah. Anybody else? Well, thank you all for coming out, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Dan-
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. It was very nice. Thank you to our friends at Rough Trade for having us. And to Johnny Temple and Akashic Books.